I made a realistic, fire-breathing Charizard. My name's Chris, and you're watching Inkling. Step 1 is to scrunch up a big sheet of tin foil to make the frame and provide extra support. We'll make a blob for the body and 2 noodles for the head and tail. Now I'll roll out some thin layers of Sculpey and slap them on the base, building up a rough shape and adding arms and legs as I go along. Once I've got the pose in shape, it's time to hit up the oven for a quick bake, leaving me with a nice solid structure to work with. So, I burnt my Sculpey. But while this looks like a monstrous turd, I was surprised to find that it set hard and was still usable. So I learned my lesson and carry on with the build. We're going to take 2 blobs of clay and attach them at the neck to form the top and bottom of the head, squeezing them together to provide sides. I'll then carve out the mouth and add a slug of clay underneath, blending it in to make the throat. Once that's done, I'll attach a flat oval on either side to make the skin at the corners of the mouth. It's time for a tiny nubbin on the upper lip, blended and separated into 2 nostrils. I'll then pop in a couple of tiny nose holes with a needle. Next up, I'm adding a couple of eyebrow ridges to shape up the face, and then some big, hungry boy cheeks. I've popped on a couple of eyes and horns to check positioning. A catfish mustache will let me build up some lips, and now it's time to add some eyelids and attitude to Charizard's face. Finally, he's starting to look like a ferocious, bad boy lizard. I'm making some folds along the throat to add a bit of texture and placing the tiniest fangs I've ever made into gums trying really, really hard not to squash the face I've spent hours making. Now we can pop some horns on. And I want to downsize the cheeks a little. It's looking a bit too much like a demon bullfrog for my liking. I'm calling the face done for now and moving on to bulk up the body. To make the legs look good, I'm going to wrap some thin sheets of clay around the stumps and let them fold naturally as I go. This will easily create the loose skin folds I want with minimal effort on my part. With that done, I'll sculpt a few extra folds around the shoulders to suggest more loose skin, then I'll finish up the legs by popping on some toes. The next big milestone is to make the wings. I've never tried to make wings before, so I decided to wing it and cover some wire and clay to build the supports, laying them over a very thin sheet of Sculpey and seeing how they looked. With this done, the sculpt is finished. If I'm honest, I think it looks pretty cool, so a final bake and it's onto the painting. Perfectly cooked this time round, I'm firing up my airbrush and starting out with a white base coat. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more cool sculpts like this in the future. Once that's dried, it's time to decide on a colour scheme. To start with, I'm going to lay down a flesh tone, which is pretty orangey, but not quite so saturated. I'm also adding an off-white for the underbelly. Time to repaint the mouth and whites of the eyes, ready for detailing. And then onwards to the texture. To do this, I'm going to turn the pressure down on my airbrush and flick the button so that a random spray of drops are produced. Moving on to the eyes, I'm going for a green iris with a yellow band. Finish with a tiny dot of black for the pupil. The wings are going to be green, but not this green, which is way too bold and opaque. I didn't, however, record the final paint job for them, so you'll have to watch this instead. With the painting done, I add a dash of UV resin to the eyes and coat the mouth to make it look nice and wet. Time to build the base. 1 sheet of foam cut to size, primed in black acrylic, then a paste of plaster, PVA glue and paint to make a ground surface is smeared on the base, and while the mixture is still wet, I'm applying a layer of fine sand and small stones. A few coats of brown in different tones, followed by dry brushing on highlights, and the job is done. The final part of this build is to create the realistic flame effects for the model. I'm going to use some Pound Shop LED fairy lights and set them up to look something like this. I already have the positioning of the sculpture in place, so I measure out the LEDs, put a hole through the base for the wires, and cut space for the battery pack. My soldering iron is busted, so this build is going to utilise a lot of twisted wires. I need to separate the lights and rearrange them to get 1 LED at the tip of the tail and a row of them positioned at the mouth. With that done, I'm going to make them look like real flames. Taking some cotton pads and teasing out the fibres, I'm applying a coat of bright yellow with my airbrush. This will let the cotton dry much quicker and keep the fibres from sticking together into a blob. Next up, the tip gets an orange spray for the cooler part of the flame, and finally a dusting of black to simulate smoke on the very edges. I'll repeat this on a larger clump of cotton for the flame breath, and then fix them into place with a quick blast of hairspray. And that is the finished flaming Charizard. Time for the glamour shots.